When you think of games exclusive to the original Xbox, games like Halo, Jet Set Radio Future, and Panzer Dragoon Auto may come to mind instantly, but if you're a fighting game fan like me, then you might have thought about Dead or Alive 3. Developed by Tecmo and released in 2001 in North America and 2002 elsewhere, DOA 3 was the first Dead or Alive game to be exclusive to a specific platform, as Dead or Alive 1 was on both the Sega Saturn and the PS1, and Dead or Alive 2 was on the Dreamcast and PS2. Dead or Alive 1 and Dead or Alive 2 were also released in the arcades first and then were ported to home consoles, which was the style at the time. However, Dead or Alive 3 was also the first game in the series to not be released in the arcades. The game came out on the Xbox, and it stayed there until it became backwards compatible with the Xbox One in November of 2021. When it comes to Dead or Alive, I'm a pretty casual fan. I don't play any of the games competitively, and I've never sat down and practiced them for hours like I have with Marvel vs. Capcom 3. With that being said, I still really love Dead or Alive for its memorable cast of characters, fun gameplay, and detailed graphics. Even though this series is best known for its personalities of the women characters, I still genuinely have fun with the fighting systems. It just so happens that my favorite character looks like a stripper. Now that we're done with the intro, let's grab our Kasumi body pillows and dive into the world of Dead or Alive 3. If you aren't familiar with Dead or Alive, allow me to inform you about the great storyline that this game has to offer. In 1784, Kasumi... Nah, nobody cares about this game's plot. Most people only play Dead or Alive for the big anime boobs, so let's just skip this and go into the character roster. Dead or Alive 3 has 17 playable characters, with 4 of them being newcomers. To start, there's Ayane, the main character, Base, the pro wrestler who is essentially the king of DOA, Bayman, a Russian mercenary who uses Sambo, Ein, the alter ego of Hayate, who is the game's only unlockable character who I haven't unlocked yet, Genfu, an old man who reminds me of Shun-Di from Virtua Fighter, Helena, an opera singer who is a top 3 waifu and I will fight anyone who says otherwise, Jan Lee, the game's answer to Bruce Lee, Kasumi, the classic kunoichi and poster girl for the series, Lei Fang, a college student who wishes to defeat Jan Lee to prove she's stronger than him, Leon, an Italian mercenary who is similar to Bayman as they both use Sambo, Ryu Hayabusa, the coolest ninja ever and protagonist of the Ninja Gaiden series, Tina, the pro wrestler daughter of Base, and finally, Zack, the video game Dennis Rodman who specializes in Muay Thai. Most of the characters are memorable, whether it's for their boob physics, deadly moves, or eccentric personalities. There's a character for everyone in Dead or Alive 3. I say most of the characters, because I don't think someone like Bayman stands out in the same way other characters like Zack and Kasumi do, but even though his design is somewhat bland, Bayman is still a lot of fun to play. All these characters are returning from the previous games, so the newcomers will have to prove their worth. We have Brad Wong, a Chinese drunken fighter, Christy, a British assassin, Hayate, a Japanese ninja, and finally Hitomi, a German-Japanese karate practitioner who enters the tournament after her dad gives her permission. It doesn't matter whether you like small characters, big characters, fast characters, slow characters, grapplers, or rushdown characters. I guarantee you that Dead or Alive has a character you'll like. A full character roster is great and all, but what content does the game contain, I hear you ask? Well, I'm glad to answer, so let's look at what content the game has to offer. First up, we have Story Mode, which tells you each character's motivations for entering the Dead or Alive tournament, with one of the weirdest final bosses I've ever played in a fighting game due to its over-the-shoulder camera angle. Time Attack, which makes you fight 8 enemies in the shortest amount of time possible. Survivor, which challenges you to keep fighting until you run out of health. Tag Battle, a 2v2 tag mode where you can switch characters with the press of a button even during combos. Team Battle, which is like the Team Battle mode found in Tekken. Versus Mode, the standard multiplayer mode that lets you fight either single or tag team matches. Watch Mode, a mode that lets you spectate fights between the CPU opponents with special camera angles. Sparring, which is the game's training mode. Theater Mode, which lets you re-watch ending movies you've unlocked. And finally, Options. At a time where lots of modern fighting games don't have survival, time attack, or tag modes, it was nice playing through these modes again to get a nostalgia rush. While the game has a great quantity of modes, if you aren't a big fan of the fighting system, you'll get bored quickly, as Dead or Alive 3 isn't going to serve anything out of the box in terms of content. There's no quest mode like in Virtua Fighter, or a side story minigame like in Tekken, so you're only going to be able to fight and not much else. Even the story mode is somewhat confusing in its presentation. I was expecting each character to have an opening movie that explains who they are and their reasons for fighting like in Tekken, but that part is found after you finish story mode. Even though this mode is very bare bones in terms of actual story being told, I still liked it for its charm. There's something about the game's characters that makes story mode endearing to play over and over again to see all the endings. Due to this being a fighting game, most people won't care about the narrative, only buying this game for the character's giant boob, only buying this game for the fighting system and to fight a friend in versus mode. So let's get into the gameplay of Dead or Alive 3. The game's controls are easy to understand, especially for a 3D fighting game. You move your character with the D-pad, Y is to punch, B is to kick, A is to throw, and X is the free button, which allows you to block by holding it down, and to reverse an opponent's attack and use it against them by tapping up, back, and X to reverse high attacks, back and X to reverse mid attacks, and down, back, and X to reverse low attacks. This system gives Dead or Alive its depth, as otherwise, its super easy combos would turn the game into a button mash extravaganza as they would be unbreakable. The hold system is one of the most fun mechanics I've experienced in a fighting game, as its simplicity ensures it's easy to understand, but it encourages you to play mind games with your opponent. If you keep doing a high combo and it's getting countered, switch it up and do a low attack, but maybe your opponent is expecting you to switch it up so then they'll counter low, but if you keep doing the high attack then they'll keep countering high. This strategy brought about by the hold system is lots of fun, and it gives new players a chance to get out of potentially devastating combos. The only other major aspect of the gameplay that comes to mind is the throw system. Like in other fighting games, throws can be broken by your opponent, but this game also has combo throws. You know how King can do those chain throws that never end in Tekken? Well, this game has that for pretty much every character. Of course, the big characters like Base and Bayman can perform chain throws, but even the smaller characters like Lei Fang, please don't age restrict me YouTube, can do chain throws too. These types of throw combos are performed by inputting a direction or motion input after a throw depending on the character, and it goes a long way in making the game more strategic and satisfying to play. And that's not all, there are other defensive options I can't even mention because if I did, we'd be here all week. The big thing I want to mention about the gameplay of Dead or Alive 3, and this also applies to more recent games like Dead or Alive 5, and I assume Dead or Alive 6 even though I haven't played it yet, is that button mashing can go really far if your opponent doesn't know what they're doing. You can pull off some heavy hitting combos just by mashing the punch and kick buttons while in neutral. This is a double-edged sword, as I'm pretty sure new players love how easy combos are to do, whereas the pros might have been a bit more apprehensive if they were coming to Dead or Alive after playing something like Tekken or Virtua Fighter. I'm not saying that Dead or Alive has no depth, far from it. I think DOA has lots of depth and strategy that make it very fun. But at least at a beginner and an intermediate level, button mashing can help here and there if the opponent doesn't know how to properly defend. While the gameplay is mostly the same as the previous game in the series, some major changes were the system the game released on and its graphics. As Dead or Alive is a Japanese game made by Japanese people in Japan with big Japanese anime bug eyes for its characters, you'd think that DOA 3 would have been released on a Japanese system and in Japanese arcades, but you'd be wrong. Because it was released on the patriotic, all-American Bill Gates hamburger system, the Xbox. Even though the Xbox was, and still is, not as popular as other systems in Japan, why did Tecmo agree to make their next big game exclusive to a system made by Baka Gaijins? Well, according to a source that definitely isn't Wikipedia, after Tecmo had released Dead or Alive 2 on the Dreamcast and Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore on the PS2, series director Tomonobu Itagaki agreed to make a deal with Microsoft after they approached Tecmo to make the next game in the Dead or Alive franchise exclusively on their machine, as they needed games that could show off the Xbox graphical capabilities. As Itagaki wanted to make games for the system with the best specs, going with the Xbox was a no-brainer, as the system has more power than the PS2. After this was all said and done, Dead or Alive 3 was released as a launch title for the Xbox in America, releasing later in 2002 in other territories. This brief history lesson serves to let you know why the game was exclusive to the Xbox, and now that you know this, you also know why the game looks so good. The characters are detailed, the environments pop and all look and feel different to one another, and the jiggle physics are indeed jiggling in Dead or Alive 3, as the game is running on the Xbox's 32-bit 733 MHZ, I don't know what that means, megahertz I think, custom Intel Pentium 3 Coppermine based processor with the power of ray tracing. I have no idea what any of that means, but it sounds awesome. When compared to Dead or Alive 2, Dead or Alive 3 looks better, mainly because the characters have more detail with their skin and outfits. Even though the women characters have nary an imperfection in sight, I'll always love you, Hitomi, the guy characters look tougher than ever with the new graphics engine provided by the Xbox. Much like the graphics, the game's presentation is clean and professionally designed, with no grammar errors whatsoever. Jokes aside, the menus haven't been translated well, and these descriptions sound more like threats rather than general information, and it adds a layer of unintentional humor to the game. I made this video to celebrate a classic fighting game franchise that isn't as popular as Tekken, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, etc., but in spite of this, Dead or Alive still has a big fanbase around the world who love it for the boobs and the brawling, and while I'm more a fan of the brawling than the boobs and brawling are some of the best boobs and brawling you'll find in the land of fighting game boobs and brawling. The point is, after being depressed over Dead or Alive 6's lukewarm critical reception, I wanted to go back and experience some classic Dead or Alive 3 as I'd never played it before. One thing led to another, so here we are on YouTube with a video made in 2022 about a game that came out 21 years ago. As mentioned previously in the video, Dead or Alive 3 is now backwards compatible with modern Xbox systems, so I recommend trying it out if you're looking for a fun fighting game to mess around with. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. I'll always love you, Zach.